It seems like every single day we're getting closer and closer to a global catastrophe. We're right on the edge of a World War III scenario, and we need to be prepared for it because it's becoming more of a reality as time goes on. And these things are happening for many different reasons, but as preppers, our goal is to adapt to our current environment and meet it head on. So in order to do that, I thought it'd be a good idea to focus on some of the categories of prepping that you would probably want to prioritize based on the fact that a World War III scenario is a likely threat. Not necessarily an imminent one right now, but we never know what the future holds. And if you're prepping for World War III to be a reality, then hit the subscribe button below because hopefully we can talk about this in the future without sticks and stones being involved. But that being said, there are some things I want to touch base on because it's been a while, basically since February, that we've had this consideration, and there are some new people out there that need a little bit more focus based on the fact that World War III presents some interesting challenges you don't get from other disaster scenarios. So on the table here, I have some examples of categories you might want to focus on or at least dabble in when it comes to being prepared for such a global catastrophe as World War III would likely be. And the number one thing I want you to keep in mind is that no matter what you're preparing for, you need food and water. Always make sure you have lots of food on hand and always make sure you have water on hand or at least access to it without the need for electricity. Because in many of these scenarios, the likelihood of an EMP is high, and that means there is no electricity running the pumps that brings the water to your tap. So if you don't have a well that's got an alternate power source, or if you don't have access to running water in your backyard because maybe you live on a mountain stream or something along those lines, make sure you have water stored up and ready to go, because without it, you're not going to last very long. Now, on the table here, we have some different categories. The first one we're going to talk about is the Cbrn equipment you see over here. Now, this is Cbrn protective equipment. It protects you from chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. And it's something you might want to make sure you have access to in case something like this ever occurs. We know that the countries who are in play right now have access to these types of weapons, and there's no one saying for sure that they won't ever use them. So being able to respond to something properly and having the equipment to be able to protect yourself from that situation is very important, especially if you find yourself out and about in that environment. So having things like a hazmat suit and everything that comes with that when it comes to gloves, when it comes to boots or boot covers, having tape in order to seal yourself off, and of course a gas mask is a good idea. And I do have some links to some of this stuff you see on the table down below in the description as well as in the pinned comment in case you're looking to get it. And some of these things actually have some discount codes as well, which is helpful for you all in case you're still looking for some of this equipment. But at the end of the day, make sure you have what you need. Like the Seychelles water bottle actually filters out radiological contaminants, whereas many other water filters do not. So there are some specialty items out there that can actually help you deal with some of that fallout and everything else related to a Cbrn event. Now, this gas mask is actually the Mira Safety MD1. It's specifically made for children. And don't forget that it's not just you have to worry about post SHTF or post nuclear event or whatever else it might be in a World War III scenario. You have to take care of your family as well. So make sure you don't just get equipment for yourself and expect your family to hide in a hole for the rest of their lives because they can't actually go anywhere because you never got them anything to protect themselves with. This all needs to trickle down to your family also. This needs to be something that everybody's on the same page with, because if you don't have things that they might need, then you're going to be watching them suffer, which is not something anyone should want to do in the preparedness community. So always keep that in mind. And of course, things like IOSAT tablets are going to be very important because you need potassium iodide in order to not get your thyroid overloaded with radioactive material, basically. That's the idea anyway. So keep all that in mind. Cbrn equipment is important to have, and if you don't have any of it, you might want to try to get some of it before it's too late. And especially if you were going to start with something and you had nothing else at all when it came to Cbrn equipment, I would probably look at the IOSAT, because having this is going to keep you safe in the sense of your body or your thyroid absorbing too much radiation. So potassium iodide is a good thing to have and a good way to go. And it's very inexpensive because a gas mask like this one can be anywhere between $200 and $300, whereas the potassium iodide I think runs about $22, $24 for a pack. So those are all things you can consider, and even if you're on a budget, there are some things you can do. Now, this isn't everything you would possibly need. This is just examples of things that you might want to look for and a category that you should be focused on. Cbrn protective equipment. Now, moving on from there, because we're talking about the possibility of like a nuclear event or something of that nature, we also have to understand that an EMP is highly likely during any kind of modern conflict between other superpowers, because an EMP would cripple the United States as well as any other modernized society. It wipes out all electricity for the most part. We don't know exactly what it would affect directly, but we do know in general that our grid is susceptible to an EMP attack, and it's something that's very publicly known, which means that there's a good chance a foreign adversary would use it. So you want something like this Faraday bag right here to protect some of your electronics. Don't expect all of your electronics to maintain their working capacity during a World War III scenario. If they're not protected in some kind of a Faraday cage or a Faraday bag, then they might not make it through that event, and then you won't have those items or electricity at all, which makes everything much more difficult. Now, this is a Crossbreed Holsters arc resistor bag, which is actually pretty cool, and it's made by a company who generally makes holsters, but I found this product, thought it was cool, and I think it's a good product for the price. I think they're like 20 bucks. But being able to put some components of electrical equipment inside of a bag like this can give you some hope after a nuclear or EMP strike style event to have some kind of communications or lights or whatever else it is you need your electricity for, especially if you have machines you rely on in the sense of maybe refrigeration for medicine or maybe like a CPAP machine or something like that. You want to protect whatever components you might need after the fact in order to stay alive. Now in here I've got radios, I've got lights, I've got chargers, and I also have a solar power battery bank that's inside of this Faraday bag. So that way I have some sort of generation system that can be utilized after the fact if everything else gets burned out. So just keep that in mind. An EMP is very likely in modern warfare between nuclear superpowers. Now, that being said, speaking about trying to keep your medicine cool or whatever else it is you need to do in the sense of storage, medicine in general is another huge World War III prep. This is a Jace case from Jace Medical. They provide you with antibiotics via over the internet, which is very nice because you don't have to go in person to a doctor or anything like that. It works just like any other doctor. It is prescribed directly to you and it is shipped to your door. But what's nice about the Jace case and what Jace Medical does is they provide you with things like antibiotics so that you have them in case of an emergency rather than only getting them after the fact. And one big part of any kind of nuclear or World War III style event is the fact that you're going to get hurt most likely at some point and you need a way to treat yourself. And if you can't, you're probably going to die. So these are things that you need to keep in mind. And what's nice is that not only is Jace case available to everybody, but we also need to look into the fact that a lot of medicines are coming from places like China where they control most of the APIs or the active pharmaceutical ingredients. So that being said, if we find ourselves in a hot conflict World War III type scenario, even if it's not with China per se, we still might not have access to a lot of the medicines that we're used to here in this country. So don't only worry about antibiotics, make sure you have whatever medicines you rely on. I don't know if you have blood thinners, I don't know if you have asthma, I don't know if you need insulin, whatever it is, you need to make sure you have access to it or a way to get more of it because a lot of that supply could be easily cut off overnight and it's something that a lot of people are still lacking in. So I would definitely focus on medication. Antibiotics are great in case you need to treat like a wound or something along those lines. Of course, infection takes a lot of people out, but you also have to consider the other medications you need on a daily basis just to stay alive. So moving on from there, that being said, talking about how China controls a lot of APIs, China produces tons of stuff, obviously, and has a stranglehold over lots of different markets. So if you're in the market for certain items right now, you might want to make sure you get them ahead of time. So we are going to talk about firearms and ammunition as being another part of this equation because a World War III scenario is going to be dangerous no matter what. It's going to be dangerous in the sense of a foreign military, a foreign adversary, but it's going to be dangerous in the sense of desperate people all around you. It's going to be very dangerous and you're going to have ways to protect yourself. Now, real quick here, this is a SIG P320. I will go ahead and show you that it is in fact now unloaded. But I did want to mention that there are some quality optics like HoloSun that come out of China, which have a good budget price point and are actually very durable and very reliable. And in fact, many people actually suggest companies like HoloSun because of the affordability aspect and the fact that they do a good job. The problem is that this optic is produced in China. And in fact, most of your electronics, even if they are made in the USA, still use Chinese components when it comes to things like their LEDs or their circuitry. So these are things you got to consider because if you don't have things like this now, there's a good chance you might not be able to get them if things really do fall apart. And that's all something that you should be considering. So I'm not telling you to go out and get HoloSuns per se. What I'm saying is that some of the cheaper but still decent and reliable optics that are out there and things of that nature when it comes to electronics in general are coming from China, and that supply could be cut off very easily. So make sure you have what you need, even if it's just something as simple as home surveillance cameras. Most of those are produced in China, and if you don't have a surveillance system before all this happens, and then you need it afterward because things are so dangerous, well, you might be out of luck. And that's why I wanted to bring this up to you, because not only is it a good idea to have optics for your firearms, but it's also a good idea to just get the electronics you might need in order to make yourself more safe during that type of event. That being said, let's get back to the SIG P320. Like I showed you, it's unloaded, it's safe, right? So the reason I'm showing this is because if you don't have a firearm at all, you need to get one. Honestly, you live in America, and if you don't live in America, I'm sorry. But if you do live in America and you don't have a firearm, but you know that this is a possibility in our future, this World War III scenario we're talking about, you should definitely have a way to defend yourself, and a firearm is really the best way to do that, especially in the sense of being a great equalizer between men and women, or Americans and foreign adversaries, or whatever else it might be. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that if you don't have a gun at all, and this is just my personal opinion, okay? If you don't own any gun at all, you're just completely empty, I suggest getting a handgun. And the reason for that is because there's only select scenarios where walking around with an AR-15 or a rifle of some sort is reasonable, right? There's only select scenarios where that doesn't make you stand out and cause you to have a target painted all over you. But a handgun can be concealed. It can be easily carried without having to use your hands. You can put it on a belt using a holster or something along those lines. And what's nice is that you always have it with you. Not everybody needs to know about it, and it's still very capable of defending you in a different situation. Now, if you already own a handgun, but you don't have an AR-15 or similar type rifle, then make sure you go get an AR-15. And there's lots of manufacturers out there that make some very budget-friendly AR-15s that can get you in the door and do the job of what they're meant to do. But if you don't have a gun at all, try to find a handgun. That's my opinion, because I think gray man still matters. I think being able to blend in and not show everybody your arm can be a huge benefit. And if you only have an AR-15 but you don't have a handgun, you really won't have that option. So I would suggest a handgun over an AR just for that reason. But once you have a handgun, you better go out and get like an AR or something. I'm just saying. Now, the reason I'm showing you this P320 is because with the P320, you get universal compatibility with what a lot of the military and law enforcement is currently using. The military switched over to the M17 and the M18, which are two variants of the Sig Sauer P320. And then the other handgun I would suggest would be something like a Glock 19, Glock 17, maybe a Glock 45 if you're into that type of thing. But that's because they're very universal. They have lots of parts, lots of accessories, lots of aftermarket support, and almost anywhere you go in the country, you're going to find something from Glock or something from SIG when it comes to those two different types of firearms, okay? Because they're the most popular handguns out there right now. And with the military adaptation, or adoption, I guess is the right word, of the P320 series, you're gonna see a lot more of this coming down the road here in the future. And then with the civilian adoption of the Glock platform, as well as law enforcement for years, that's still prevalent and still very available in the sense of parts, in the sense of magazines, and everything else you would be concerned about in a long-term SHTF scenario. So that's just something I wanted to bring to your attention. But if you have a firearm, you got to make sure you have enough ammunition for it as well. So make sure you have plenty of ammunition too. It's expensive right now. Sometimes it's harder to get a hold of, but without enough ammunition, you can't train, which makes it so you're not efficient, which means that having that firearm isn't as beneficial as it could be. So those are all things to keep in mind. Should you have lots of ammo on hand because you might need it and you might not have access to it for a very long time? I think so, but do I think you should train and use your ammo, even if it means having a little bit less on hand, but being more proficient with a firearm? I definitely think so. So that being said, I wanted to remind everybody of some of these categories and some of these things to think about when it comes to a World War III scenario. Look, getting a bunker, having sandbags, or anything along those lines could definitely come in handy. Being able to get plenty of food and water is going to be the most important thing. But having access to some of this stuff is also going to be very helpful. So I wanted to share this with you and to remind everybody of some of the things you might want to be focusing on. We could talk about a lot of other things as well. We could talk about comms, we could talk about solar and generators and all kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff might go out the window based on an EMP scenario. And if you don't have the bare minimum of Faraday bags or Faraday cages for that equipment, then that stuff's not going to matter anyway. So that's why I wanted to focus on what you see right here, the stuff that can actually keep you alive in the immediate, and then we can talk about all the other stuff afterward once you've got those preparations in place in order to just stay alive during the first strike or whatever else it might be. So hopefully this gave you some good reminders. Hopefully this gave you some things to think about. If you have any questions for me, leave it in the comments below. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.